Leave your hope at the door. What you are about to see is not a tragedy. It is an inevitability. I am only here to show you how it was built. To understand the modern financial predator, we must observe a rare specimen that perfected the art of disappearing while standing in the middle of a crowded room. In the high-stakes theatre of Manhattan, wealth is usually a loud, vulgar affair. It screams through Italian leather, penthouses overlooking Central Park, and engines that roar with the fragile ego of their owners. But Bill Hwang was a phantom, a biological anomaly in an ecosystem defined by excess. He lived in a quiet suburb, in a house that didn't stand out from its neighbors, and he drove a car that a junior analyst would consider a personal insult. He spent his mornings in deep, visible prayer, presenting the plumage of a saint to a world that was desperately looking for a savior to believe in. But observe the naturalist truth. The markets don't care about your God. Faith is for the soul, a private comfort for the weary and the lost. The New York Stock Exchange only accepts collateral, and it does so with a cold, unblinking eye that never sleeps. This was the first sweet lie, the shield of humility. He understood a fundamental law of predation. If you look small enough, if you appear harmless, devout and soft-spoken, no one will notice when you become too big to fail. While the world saw a man of God, the banks saw a golden goose, a source of endless fees that required no difficult questions and no intrusive oversight. But the egg he was laying was already radioactive. He was constructing a financial nuclear reactor in his basement while the world watched him pray for the poor. He was the ghost that everyone invited in for dinner, never realizing he was already carrying the fire that would burn their entire house to the ground. Every monster has a lineage, a genetic trail that leads back to the original alpha of the pack. Bill was a tiger cub, a protege of the legendary Julian Robertson at Tiger Management. Robertson didn't just teach his cubs how to read a balance sheet, he taught them how to hunt. In the hallowed, high-pressure halls of Tiger, the culture was one of extreme conviction and absolute unmitigated aggression. It was a brutal environment where the weak were culled without mercy and the bold were rewarded with mountains of fresh capital. Robertson taught them that if you have a high-conviction idea, you don't just place a polite bet, you weaponize your capital. You strike with such overwhelming force that the market has no choice but to bend to your will. You dominate the liquidity until you are the only one left standing in the arena. Bill Hwang took this predatory DNA and added a darker, more volatile ingredient, a total pathological disregard for the concept of enough. He did not just want to win the game, he wanted to consume the entire board and leave nothing for the scavengers. In the early 2000s, the hunt turned into a visible crime that even the blindest regulators couldn't ignore. The Securities and Exchange Commission caught him red-handed in a massive insider trading scandal involving Chinese bank stocks. A $44 million fine was handed down like a slap on the wrist to a billionaire. To any other man, this was a death sentence, a permanent exile from the world of finance. To Bill, it was merely an expensive tuition fee for a higher education in deception. He realized the only way to keep hunting in a regulated pond was to become invisible, to move entirely below the sensory range of the authorities. He closed his hedge fund and opened a family office called Archegos. A family office is a dark corner of the financial world. No regulators, no public reporting, total and absolute darkness. He began turning a fortune into a weapon of mass destruction, operating in a vacuum where no one could see the true size of his shadow. He was no longer just a trader. He was a ghost moving under the ice, a leviathan in a pond that didn't know it was being drained of its lifeblood to feed a single, insatiable hunger. Observe the internal mechanics of his cult-like operation, for this is where the naturalist finds the true horror. Inside the offices of Archegos, the walls were lined with the imagery of devotion, and every workday began with mandatory group prayer and intense Bible study. It was a psychological masterstroke of the highest order. By framing his aggressive market manipulation as a divine mission, he ensured the absolute, unquestioning loyalty of his staff. Who among them would dare to question the risk management or the ethical boundaries of a man who claimed to have a direct line to the creator of the universe? He created a closed loop where dissent was not just a professional failure, but a spiritual transgression. The tiger cub had become a wolf in sheep's clothing, using the language of the pulpit to mask the low, guttural roar of the predator. His employees were not analysts. They were acolytes in a temple of leverage, feeding the fire of an ego that knew no bounds. They were trained to ignore the red lights on their screens, believing that faith would provide the liquidity they so desperately lacked. How do you control $160 billion without the world ever knowing your name or seeing your face? You use the total return swap. This is the heart of the ghost machine, the artificial organ that allowed the whale to breathe underwater while the surface remained calm. Hwang didn't buy stocks like a normal investor. He didn't want his name appearing on any public filings that might alert the herd. He went to the prime brokerage desks of the world's most prestigious and greedy institutions: Nomura, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and of course the ever-vulnerable, ever-clueless Credit Suisse. He told them, "I want the profit, but I don't want my name on the certificate. You hold the shares in your name, and I will pay you a handsome fee for the privilege of your silence." The banks, blinded by the intoxicating frequency of high-volume fees and the saintly, humble reputation of the client, said yes, without a second thought. They became the mechanical life support system for a parasite they refused to diagnose. He played them like a master puppeteer, using the same collateral to borrow from 5 different masters simultaneously. It was a biological heist of the global banking system, performed in plain sight under the cover of proprietary trading. Each bank thought they were his primary partner, his favored child, never realizing he had duplicated his massive, reckless bets across the entire street. By early 2021, he was a whale moving through the dark, and the banks were too drunk on the fees to realize they were holding the leash of a monster that was already in the process of eating them alive. He was 5 times the size of the market's perception, a financial anomaly that defied the laws of risk management and gravity until the weight of the debt finally demanded its pound of flesh. He had become a systemic risk, a bubble made of ego and borrowed billions, waiting for the first pinprick of reality to burst. Monday, March 22nd, 2021. The wind shifted, as it always does when the cycle of predation reaches its peak. Viacom CBS announced a stock offering, and the market's appetite for the Saints' favourite stocks suddenly vanished into thin air. The floor fell out. For a man leveraged 5-1, even a small tremor is an atmospheric earthquake. Observe the cold math of the abyss. 5-1 leverage isn't a strategy. It's a suicide note, written in gold ink and signed with the blood of the unaware. When the price of his primary holdings began to drop, the reactor in the basement began to melt. The margin calls started screaming through the terminals like wounded animals in a forest fire. The banks called Bill, hoping for more collateral, hoping for the saint to save them from their own greed. But Bill didn't answer the phone. He was praying. He was locked in his office, seeking a miracle from a deity that doesn't trade in equities. A fascinating biological response. When the leverage of man fails, the predator appeals to the leverage of the divine. He spent the entire week believing in a miracle that never came, perhaps convinced that his past devotion had earned him a celestial bailout from the ultimate regulator. But the heavens remained silent. The New York Stock Exchange does not accept penance, only liquidity. The banks didn't just fail to manage the risk, they performed their roles with a tragic mechanical precision that only a crumbling, dying institution can achieve. Credit Suisse, a name that has become synonymous with making professional mistakes with amateur enthusiasm since 1856. They were the last to realize the building was on fire, clutching their fee agreements while their capital turned to ash in their trembling hands. They sat in their glass towers in Zurich, watching $20 billion of personal wealth vanish in 48 hours. It was the largest individual loss in the history of the species. The ghost whale had breached for the final time, and the splash was felt in every boardroom from Tokyo to Zurich. The law finally caught the ghost in the cold light of day. The sweet lies ended in a Manhattan courtroom where the neon lights are far less forgiving than the shadows of a family office. In November 2024, the hammer fell with the weight of a dying son. 18 years in federal prison. The judge saw a $9 billion restitution order as the only fair price for a life built on a foundation of total, systematic deception. The banks drained the swamp to recover what little they could, but in the end, even the ghost whale couldn't swim in a sea of red ink. Now, Bill Hwang is a number in a 6x9 cell. A specimen preserved in the sterile, airless environment of the federal penal system, far away from the prayer rooms and the Bloomberg terminals. He is a relic of a time when the banks forgot that a ghost is still a predator. Credit Suisse is gone, a tombstone for a ghost, absorbed by its rivals like a fallen animal in the wild. Its legacy of incompetence erased by its own greed. But the machine is eternal. Because on Wall Street, the only thing they love more than a profit is the leverage that makes them feel like a god. This was the price of the whale. The cost of believing that you can manipulate the heartbeat of the market without ever paying the bill. It is a cycle of predation that requires a constant supply of new believers and even newer, sweeter lies to keep the engine running. The market has a long memory for losses, but a short memory for the lessons learned from them. Already a new generation of cubs is being trained to hunt, and the darkness of the family office remains as thick as ever. As the ghost whale sinks into the absolute silence of his cell, the machine is already recalibrating for a different kind of harvest. We leave the cold, hard arithmetic of Wall Street and move toward the neon-lit pulpits where desperation is the only currency left. Our next investigation follows a predator who traded the Bloomberg terminal for a hidden earpiece. A man who claimed to hear the voice of the divine while merely tuning into a radio frequency on the FM dial. In our next episode, we unmask the miracle merchant who harvested the hope of the sick and turned it into a multi-million-dollar empire of static, noise, and calculated deceit. The signal is changing, the frequency is shifting, and the hunt is moving from the bank vault to the airwaves of the faithful. Stay tuned for the next evolution of the species, because even as the signal fades, the hunt never truly ends. Subscribe for more. The next lie is already being told, and the predator is already leaning into the microphone.